just entertain me for a moment here. Let's travel back in time. Let's go back to 2007, if you will. A time when we didn't really know what an iPhone was, and they only cost $200, and our attention span was so long. But it's 2007 in San Francisco. Beautiful place, beautiful weather. There are two guys, Brian and Joe, and they are recent graduates of a design school in Rhode Island. And they recently got jobs in San Francisco, and they're trying to make it, but they have a problem. They are dead broke. And so they get an idea. They realize that there is a design conference coming to the city, and all the hotels are booked up. And they said, how about a way to help us with rent? Why don't we blow up our 3 air mattresses and offer them for $20 a piece and put it on Craigslist? And they do it, and it goes very, very well. They make their $20. They put it on Craigslist as a bed and breakfast. And they start to get this idea. They said, what if we just kept doing this? What if we had other people do it? And then, surely enough, what was an air mattress bed and breakfast becomes Airbnb. And now Brian and Joe are doing quite all right with a company that is now worth $80 billion. Now, we kind of love origin stories like that, don't we? We love hearing how global movements and companies and people take off. There was that one moment when it was just them. There's the story of 2 Stanford PhD students who want to make the internet more clickable through its links, and so they go to a garage and they start figuring it out, and all of a sudden they start Google, which becomes a dominant empire today. Or Steve Jobs in Silicon Valley, also in a garage. He wants to make the behemoth that is the computer more personable, and he comes out with the Apple I and then Apple II, and now what we all have in our pockets. Or in 2004, the National Democratic Convention, an unknown senator from Illinois in his first term walks onto the stage, gives a killer speech, and walks off only 4 years later to go into the White House. All these stories have very common themes. It always starts with one person at one moment. Maybe there's 2 people, but they're always alone. In the beginning, no one really believes in them. They have an idea, and it's novel. And then they run with it, and it becomes something. And they usually start in a garage. So this week, I want to look at what is the Jesus movement's origin story? What's our garage? How did Jesus start a movement, and what did it look like? And so if you have a Bible, turn with me. We're going to be in Luke 23, and I'm going to start in verse 32. This is Jesus as he's making his way to the cross, about to be crucified, starting in verse 32. 2 others who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified him. And the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they cast lots to divide his garments. So our story starts with 2 criminals, and we're going to get to them in a moment. But I first want to kind of zoom in on this thing that Jesus says. And if you know anything about a Roman crucifixion, you know that they don't die from nailing you. They die from asphyxiation. They can't speak. But yet Jesus musters up the ability to say something, even though it's incredibly difficult. And I don't know about you, but if I were Jesus, in this moment, this would be my moment to set the record straight. I would come up with something like, all of you are dumb. All of you will be remembered in history for the wrong reasons forever. 2,000 years later, people will be reading about you, and they'll be mocking you. What are you doing? But Jesus thankfully does not do that. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, if we're reading, the natural question is, Jesus, what are you saying? Because I think they know what they're doing. Like, I think they're quite aware that they are intentionally killing you. So what does Jesus mean here? Is he calling them innocent? Is God somehow using these people? They don't know it? I don't think Jesus is calling them innocent because they wouldn't need forgiveness. I think what Jesus is saying is that they know what they're doing, but they don't know what they're doing fully. Now, I want to zoom out for a minute. At this moment, when Jesus is on the cross, who from his crowd, from his disciples, who's with him? Which disciple is at the foot of the cross saying, you can't do this. This is the Son of God. Stop what you're doing. There's nobody. All the people who saw all the miracles that Jesus did, how he healed the lame, made them walk, let the blind see, all the times that he fed the thousands with nothing left. When Jesus rebukes the sea, the disciples see it. At the transfiguration, they see his glory. They hear his predictions time and time again. There was a moment in Jesus' ministry when the crowds would do anything just to touch him. But how about now? The Jesus movement at this moment has dissipated. The disciples, man, they sold their stock. They bought low and sold low. Judas is gone. Peter, back to the sea he goes. No longer a fisher of men, just a mere fisherman from Galilee once again. The other disciples, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, silent. There is nobody who is still doing their role in the Jesus movement. Everybody gave it up. They left. Except one, Jesus. What is Jesus still doing? Right, like in his most vulnerable and most weak moment, when all of his friends have turned on him, when no one believes in this movement no more, Jesus is doing the same old thing he's been doing since day one, communicating with the Father and forgiving the sins of many. Still doing his role at the very last moment when he could barely say anything. Jesus did not abdicate his role. Luke told us earlier that Jesus came to save and seek the lost, and he did it until his final moment. Jesus was willing to forgive. Irenaeus, who is a 2nd century theologian, an early church father, one of the first believers in the Jesus movement, when he was meditating on this section of scriptures, hear what he said. Jesus exclaimed upon the cross, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." The long-suffering, patience, compassion, and goodness of Christ are all exhibited since he both suffered and did himself, acquitted those who had maltreated him. For the word of God, who said to us, "Love your enemies and pray for those that hate you," himself did this very thing upon the cross, loving the human race to such a degree that he even prayed for those putting him to death. Now, if we just take a moment and zoom out and talk about Jesus' call for forgiveness, I would say today, you could disagree with me, but I would say today, to some degree, Jesus' plea and prayer for forgiveness somewhat falls on deaf ears today. Because for the most part, forgiveness in popular culture has taken a little bit of a beating, except for probably student loan forgiveness. That is the only thing. I don't care what happens to the economy. I want all my student loans forgiven. But last year in the New York Times, they wrote an article that I thought was kind of indicative of our culture. And it says, the title is, "Sometimes Forgiveness is Overrated." And one of the authors said, sometimes forgiveness could be very self-destructive, and it can be dangerous to forgive. Now, they equate forgiveness with reconciliation, but that's a different sermon. But I think it's a little bit indicative of what people say. That like forgiveness is something passed on to us from religion, and we have this religious guilt, and we feel like we should, but maybe modern psychology says it's bad, so we shouldn't do it, and you should only forgive on your terms, because forgiveness could be dangerous. You could be hurt. Which are all fair critiques, and I would love to spend time with them individually, but just for a moment, I think that's kind of the vibe that I've gotten the last few years, that forgiveness is kind of a thing that's antiquated. But recently, just this last week, a story came across my computer that I was compelled by. And it was a sociologist's research study of an event that took place in Pennsylvania in 2006. At an Amish schoolhouse, a gunman had gone into the school, and he had taken a group of kids and held them hostage. And it eventually led to the point where he shot 10 of the children, and 5 of them died, and then he committed suicide. And the families of the Amish school children, once they learned that their children had been murdered, they all together got up and walked to the gunman's family's home. And they all unanimously expressed forgiveness to them and to the family. That they understood it was not their fault, and they forgave their son for what they did. And sociologists were a little bit puzzled by what would compel such a group to do something like that within hours, to walk over and to forgive a group of people. And in a secular study, this is what they concluded. For the Amish, gracious remembering involves habits nurtured by memories of Jesus forgiving his tormentors while hanging on a cross. And when they walked over to the killer's family with words of grace a few hours after the death, they were acting on those habits. You see, for this group of people, the moment that Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do," they understood what it felt like to be forgiven, and so they needed to forgive others. And the study concludes with this line that I think is so relevant. Most of us have been formed by a culture that nourishes revenge and mocks grace. That what the Amish did in this story is so countercultural, but it is so relevant because we all need forgiveness. But their point of forgiveness was not just some moral courage they had in themselves. It was something they saw in Jesus. I have a really good friend of mine who I go to for advice from time to time. And there have been a couple moments when I've met with him, and I've expressed moments where I feel like personally someone has wronged me. And every time I tell this friend, "Man, this person wrongs me, what do I do?" he always says, "How can we have compassion for this person?" I remember the first time I was like, "Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you for saying that. That's really good. That's really good. Thank you." The 50th time, it was not good anymore. I was like, I have so much compassion. I want justice, okay? I want the two to go together, right? And he would always laugh and say, "You don't want justice." And what my friend is so good at doing is he is trying to get me to see the people that I am frustrated with like me, someone who is in need of compassion and forgiveness. That what I so desperately need, I also have to offer. You know, there's a popular saying in our culture, which is that hurt people hurt people. But one of my friends likes to rebuttal this, and he says, yes, hurt people do hurt people, but also loved people love people, and healed people heal people, encouraged people encourage people. If we can pass on our wounds, we can also pass on our healing. And I think in the same way, Jesus' people are a forgiven people, and thus we forgive. And now I want to say that with just a little bit of a pause, because here's the moment in the sermon where I tell you, now today, get your phone out and text that person that you haven't talked to in 6 years and tell them you forgive them and you love them and it's all good. And you have this religious guilt and you're like, I do this every time there's a forgiveness sermon. But I want to just press, that is true. We forgive people. But I think a more fundamental thing that I've seen in my own Christian walk and in others is that many people have no problem with the reality that Jesus forgave people, with the understanding that he forgave, but they have a really difficult problem with seeing it for themselves. And so one of the points I would want to just drive home is today, let's not distance ourselves from the crowd in this story, where they need forgiveness because they're bad, they put Jesus to death, obviously, we get it. While we didn't participate in the crowd, we so badly need to receive Jesus' prayer, that we have been forgiven. And it's a powerful thing when you can stop trying to do for others what you so desperately need yourself. And so my encouragement to us today is to look at Jesus' prayer not as an others prayer to someone else, but to us, that we are a forgiven people. And we can forgive, but only when we truly feel and understand that we have been forgiven. Read with me in verse 35. And the people stood by watching, but the ruler scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others, let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." I want to, for just a moment, look at the titles that they call Jesus. They say he's Christ of God, he's the chosen one, King of the Jews, the Christ. And again, if if I was Jesus, this would be my moment to say, don't misrepresent me. Because they're calling him all these titles that everyone has called him, but they're mocking him. They're taking it out of context. This would be my moment to bring justice. Don't misrepresent me. Don't call me things when you don't truly mean it. But God does not do that. Jesus, rather, interestingly, allows himself to be misunderstood. Think about that for a moment. I think one of the most fundamental aspects of Jesus' ministry that we too often forget is that Jesus willingly and regularly let himself be misunderstood. Jesus was willing to be misunderstood. If you read the Gospels, you'll see him perform a miracle, you'll see him predict his death, and the disciples are like, no idea, misunderstood, do not get it. Scribes and the Pharisees consistently take him out of context, misrepresent him. His own parents don't even understand what his mission is. No one in Jesus' circle understood who he was. But Jesus did not come to clarify. He did not come to set the record straight. Whether he was understood or not was not Jesus' priority. And just to be, I'm trying to relate with Jesus. One of my major pet peeves is being misunderstood. It's like right up there with people who eat slow and tipping for coffee to go. It drives me up the wall. Like, if people misrepresent what I say or what I do, I just get livid. I'm like a big fan of, it's not exactly what I said. Like I do that all the time. But I was trying to think of like, what would be a parallel of what Jesus has kind of experienced in his whole life. Like, I just imagine if everyone ever never got your name right. Like, not just like misrepresent, like someone said Danielle, but like called me Jack, everywhere, forever. I would lose my mind. Jesus does this with his entire being for his entire life, and he is totally fine with it. He is so willing to be misunderstood. Paul David Tripp, who has a great kind of Christmas devotional, he has a chapter on this, and he says, Jesus was willing to take on human flesh with all its frailty. He was willing to go through the dependency of childhood. He was willing to be misunderstood and mistreated. He was willing to endure rejection and gross injustice. He was willing to endure physical torture. He was willing to die. He was willing to rise and to ascend to be our constant advocate. Jesus was willing. Jeff Bezos once said that you have to be willing to be misunderstood in order to innovate. And I think Jesus understood that he had to be misunderstood in order to save. And what I think is so significant is in this moment, all the titles that the people called Jesus, Christ of God, His chosen one, King of the Jews, the Christ, like they're right. He is those things. They just have the wrong idea. Like they could never imagine the Son of God would be on the cross. And so they mock him and misrepresent him. They have the right titles, but of who God is, they have the wrong ideas. One of my favorite painters is a guy named Jackson Pollock, who is a mid-20th century abstract expressionist painter. And he just brought a bunch of chaotic energy to painting. And I love his paintings. I want to throw one on the screen called Convergence. And we have so many art people in our church that I wouldn't dare lead through like an interpretation exercise. So I'm just take that in for a moment and enjoy it. What do you see in it? For me, this kind of painting is just beautiful. But when Jackson Pollock first came on the scene, people did not think it was very beautiful. I pulled some art critics' reviews of Jackson Pollock when he first came onto the scene. This is what they said about Convergence in particular. Mere unorganized explosions of random energy and therefore meaningless. One from the New York Times said, "This is not art. It is a joke in bad taste." That's a little bit like the reaction that Jesus gets on the cross. This is a joke. You call this a king. You call this the Son of God. This is no king. completely misunderstood. And if you fast forward to today, someone is willing to pay $150 million for a Jackson Pollock painting. And billions of people all over the world chant those very titles people mocked at him at, saying he is the Christ of God, he is the chosen one, he is the Christ, and they mean it. And we can all pay $40 a piece to go walk on the ruins of the Roman Empire. All because Jesus was willing to be misunderstood. In the end, he was deeply understood. And so the cross is our daily reminder that Jesus is God, but not the kind of God that we think of. We want a king. We want someone to overthrow Rome. We want someone to come in and bring all their forces, but Jesus instead submits himself to the cross. He is willing to be misunderstood, but yet he understands us. What a beautiful paradox. And so this is something that I think we can learn from a little bit, which is that to partake in the way of Jesus is to partake in being a misunderstood individual. And I hate it. I don't like when someone at work or when I meet someone new and they give me that question, are you a Christian? You know that question? And I have so much fear. I just project so much fear. I'm like, yes, but I listen to rap music. You know, like I just want to throw in, like I'm normal. Don't do it. You know, I've been to a brewery. Don't think that thing, you know? But I have this fear that they're going to think I'm a country bumpkin who believes in primitive ideas just so he can sleep at night. And I hate it. But this week is a good reminder to look at Jesus and to say they didn't get him, they're probably not going to get us. One of my favorite writers, a Catholic writer, Flannery O'Connor, she put it this way: you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd. Or as Paul puts it in 1 Corinthians, we are fools for Christ's sake. To be misunderstood is to partake in the way of Jesus. And that can be a good thing. We don't always have to prove our point. They don't always have to get us. Because then we can offer something distinct, something different, something new, which is the way of Jesus. Continue with me in verse 40. But the other rebuked him, this is the other prisoner, the thief on the cross, saying, do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong. And he said, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And he said to him, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise. At the end of the whole story, there is one person that actually understands who Jesus is. One. Everybody's left, but this thief on the cross gets Jesus. In church history, anyone who goes unnamed in the early church, they all get a name. So you read these commentaries, they all give everyone a name, and the thief on the cross gets the name Dismas. And here's a 15th century rendering of Dismas in an Arabic Christian church. He becomes venerated in the church tradition as someone who truly sees who God is. And I just want to pause and reflect on this for a moment. Right now, 30% of the world would identify as someone who follows Jesus. There are 2 billion people right now worshiping Jesus alongside you. And I know that it can feel sometimes isolating in a big city that if you're a Christian, you might be the only one, but you are part of the largest thing in the world. The Catholic Church is the largest institution in the entire world. But there was a moment when there was only one. I often think about Jesus going to heaven at this moment, and God the Father's like, how were your 33 years on earth and you did all those miracles? How did people respond? And Jesus is like, there's one guy. We got one. One? You got one guy? Only one. But I think the thief on the cross fundamentally encapsulates who Jesus is. This thief on the cross, by his own admission, deserves to be there. He does not know anything about Jesus. He has not seen him perform a miracle. He doesn't know where he's from. He doesn't know anything. But he knows enough. The thief on the cross is supposed to be the juxtaposition of the disciples. The disciples, they saw Jesus do all these beautiful things. And when the moment comes, they're gone. One New Testament scholar put it this way: some saw Jesus raise the dead and did not believe. The robber sees him being put to death and yet believes. This moment encapsulates that for Jesus, no one is too far gone, and that even to his last breath, he is still doing what he's been called to do, which is to save people. Jesus was willing to save. Another early church commentary, Tertullian, in the mid-2nd century, he says this: for even in his very passion, meaning his death, he set the robber free. For it was to this end he had come, that being himself pure from sin and in all respects holy, he might undergo death on behalf of sinners. Tertullian basically says the thief on the cross is the entire reason Jesus came. And what I love about the thief on the cross is that he's able to see God when nobody else can. Everyone in the crowd sees Rome is winning. That is power on display. But the thief on the cross, he knows that the true power is hanging right there on the cross. The thief on the cross somehow knows who's winning. Malcolm Gladwell, who is a writer for The New Yorker, and he makes it into every sermon I preach because his stories are gold. But he has this one book called David and Goliath, and he offers a different interpretation on the very famous story, David and Goliath. We often tell this story when you have a big opponent or a big deadline or whatever, and it's like Goliath, and you're the true underdog, and that's who wins, and it's a beautiful story. But Malcolm Gladwell does a rereading of it, and he says, if you look at it actually, Goliath is at a severe disadvantage. He's really big. He cannot move very well. He's covered in armor. He's thick and not going anywhere. And then also, Goliath can't see. There's a moment where David's approaching him and he has stones and he thinks they're sticks. But then David has no armor, shuns it. He's mobile, agile, young, ready to move. And he has a slingshot. And this is it's not one of those. It's like in ancient Near East, it was a killing device. And he was a shepherd boy and he had perfected it. He could put a hole through a tree. And Malcolm Gladwell's conclusion is that even though David is young, he is no underdog. And that's a little bit like what's happening in the story of Jesus. That Jesus is on a cross, but he's no underdog. He might be spitted on, naked, made fun of, and shamed and misunderstood, but he was not losing. One of my professors likes to say that the story of Christianity is about how the hero dies and somehow we still win. And the thief on the cross, he gets that. Christ is no underdog. And I think the thief on the cross is someone that you and I can learn from because he has this ability to see God when others cannot see him, which is a talent that will take you a lifetime to perfect. When you think about the moments in your life where you felt abandoned, where you felt totally alone, and you might have had some choice words for God. Just this week, I was with a friend, and I was recounting one of the hardest periods of my life. And I remember those days, and I remember the things that I would say to God. And I felt like he was absent, felt like he was out to lunch. And I looked back on it this week, and I was just overwhelmed with seeing how God was present every time. That I had forgotten how he provided this, and gave me this, and helped me through this. And man, my prayer as I was reading about the thief on the cross was I want eyes like that. When no one else can see God, I want to be able to see him. In moments that it feels like he's absent, I want to see his presence. I think this could be a discipline that we could pray for, to be able to see God in his saving power. The thief on the cross was able to see that God was there, that God was willing, and he believed in him. And that'd be a powerful thing for our own lives. We started this conversation about the origin stories of Christianity. This is the origin story of our faith. It dwindles down to one person and one person left. But what I love about these origin stories is that if you read them, there's a common myth about them. Like if you read about Google or Apple or even Airbnb, that over the years, as they kind of get away from when the event actually happened, people start to get removed from the story so it can become a little more heroic. That it was just two people and no one believed in them, but the more you do research, a lot of people believed in them. And they were behind them, and they had customers, and they had all these things. They call it the founder's myth. And I think we've done that a little bit in Christianity. We only display one cross. But there was two up there. There was three. But there was one person that believed in him. One person who saw what we see today. And that's a beautiful thing. The thief on the cross saw that Jesus was willing to forgive and willing to be misunderstood and willing to save, and he took a chance, and he was right. My prayer is that we would go and do likewise. Pray with me. God, as we journey towards Calvary, toward the ultimate moment of your death, resurrection, and ascension, help us not to forget who you revealed yourself to be on the cross. Even in your agony, when words were hard to form, you spoke forgiveness. When you could have proven yourself, you chose instead to be misunderstood. And in your final moments, when a soul reached out to you, you welcomed them into paradise. Empower us, Holy Spirit, to truly see the kind of God that you are. Help us to live this out in our own lives. Make us people who are forgiving freely, who are willing to be misunderstood for the sake of love, and who recognize your presence when others cannot. We ask for your help in this. It's in your beautiful name that we pray. Amen.